Where do you think it's all headed? Do you ever think about try to visualize the entirety of the evolutionary system and see if there's an arrow to it and a destination to it?
So, the best way to understand the future is to look at the past. If you look at the trajectory, then you can kind of learn something about the direction in which we're heading. And if you look at the trajectory of life on Earth, it's really about information processing. So the concept of the senses evolving one after the other, being like bacteria are able to do chemotaxis. It basically means moving towards a chemical gradient. And that's the first thing that you need to sort of hunt down food. The next step after that is being able to actually perceive light. So all life on this planet and all life that we know about evolved on this rotating rock. Every 24 hours, you get sunlight and dark, sunlight and dark. And light is a source of energy. Light is also information about where is up. Light is all kinds of things. So you can basically now start perceiving light and then perceiving shapes beyond just the sort of single photoreceptor. You can now have complex eyes or multiple eyes and then start perceiving motion or perceiving direction, perceiving shapes. And then you start building infrastructure on the cognitive apparatus to start processing this information and making sense of the environment, building more complex models of the environment. So if you look at that trajectory of evolution, what we're experiencing now and humans are basically, according to this sort of information theoretic view of evolution, humans are basically the next natural step. And it's perhaps no surprise that we became the dominant species of the planet. Because yes, there's so many dimensions in which some animals are way better than we are, but at least on the cognitive dimension, we're just simply unsurpassed on this planet and perhaps the universe. But the concept that if you now trace this forward, we talked a little bit about evolvability and how things get better at evolving. One possibility is that the next layer of evolution builds the next layer of evolution. And what we're looking at now with humans and AI is that having mastered this information capability that humans have from this quote unquote old hardware, this basically, biological evolved system that kind of, somehow in the environment of Africa and then in the subsequent environments of sort of dispersing through the globe was evolutionarily advantageous. That has now created technology which now has a capability of solving many of these cognitive tasks. It doesn't have all the baggage of the previous evolutionary layers, but maybe the next round of evolution on Earth is self-replicating AI, where we're actually using our current smarts to build better programming languages and the programming languages to build, ChatGPT, and that to then build the next layer of software that will then sort of help AI speed up. And it's lovely that we're coexisting with this AI, that sort of the creators of this next layer of evolution, this next stage, are still around to help guide it and hopefully will be for the rest of eternity as partners. But it's also nice to think about it as just simply the next stage of evolution, where you've kind of extracted away the biological needs. Like if you look at animals, most of them spend 80% of their waking hours hunting for food or building shelter. Humans, maybe 1% of that time. And then the rest is left to creative endeavors. And AI doesn't have to worry about shelter, etc. So basically, it's all living in the cognitive space. So in a way, it might just be a very natural sort of next step to think about evolution. And that's on the sort of purely cognitive side. If you now think about humans themselves, the ability to understand and comprehend our own genome, again, the ultimate layer of introspection, gives us now the ability to even mess with this hardware, not just augment our capabilities through interacting and collaborating with AI, but also perhaps understand the neural pathways that are necessary for, you know, um, empathetic thinking, for justice, for this and this and that, and sort of help augment human capabilities through neuronal interventions, through chemical interventions, through electrical interventions, to basically help steer the human bag of hardware that we kind of evolved with into greater capabilities. And then ultimately, by understanding not just the wiring of neurons and the functioning of neurons, but even the genetic code, we could even, at one point in the future, start thinking about, well, can we get rid of psychiatric disease? Can we get rid of neurodegeneration? Can we get rid of dementia? And start perhaps even augmenting human capabilities, not just getting rid of disease.
Can we tinker with the genome, with the hardware, or getting closer to the hardware without having to deeply understand the baggage? In the way we've disposed of the baggage in our software systems with AI, to some degree, not fully, but to some degree, can we do the same with the genome? Or is the genome deeply integrated into this
I
baggage?
wouldn't want to get rid of the baggage. The baggage is what makes us awesome. So the fact that I'm sometimes angry and sometimes hungry and sometimes hangry is perhaps contributing to my creativity. I don't want to be dispassionate. I don't want to be another robot. I want to get in trouble and I want to sort of say the wrong thing and I want to sort of make an awkward comment and sort of push myself into reactions and responses and things that can get just people thinking differently. And I think our society is moving towards a humorless space where everybody's so afraid to say the wrong thing that people kind of start quitting en masse and start like not liking their jobs and stuff like that. Maybe we should be kind of embracing that human aspect a little bit more and all of that baggage aspect and not necessarily thinking about replacing it. On the contrary, like embracing it and sort of this coexistence of the cognitive and the emotional hardwares.
So, embracing and celebrating the diversity that springs from the baggage versus kind of pushing towards and empowering this kind of pull towards conformity.
Yeah. And in fact, with the advent of AI, I would say, and these seemingly extremely intelligent systems that sort of can perform tasks that we thought of as extremely intelligent at the blink of an eye, this might democratize intellectual pursuits. Instead of just simply wanting the same type of brains that, carry out specific ways of thinking, we can, like, instead of just always only wanting, say, the mathematically extraordinary to go to the same universities, what you could simply say is like, who needs that anymore? We now have AI. Maybe what we should really be thinking about is the diversity and the power that comes with the diversity, where AI can do the math. And then we should be getting a bunch of humans that sort of think extremely differently from each other. And maybe that's the true cradle of innovation.
But AI can also, these large language models can also be, with just a few prompts, essentially fine tuned to be diverse from the center. So the prompts can really take you away into unique territory. You can ask the model to act in a certain way and it will start to act in that way. Is that possible that the language models could also have some of the magical diversity that makes us so damn interesting?
So I would say humans are the same way. So basically, when you sort of prompt humans to basically, in a given environment to act a particular way, they change their own behaviors. And the old saying is, "Show me your friends, and I'll tell you who you are."
Mm-hmm.
More like, "Show me your friends, and I'll tell you who you'll become."
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily that you choose friends that are like you, but I mean, that's the first step. But then the second step is that, the kind of behaviors that you find normal in your circles are the behaviors that you'll start espousing. And that type of meta evolution, where every action we take not only shapes our current action and the result of this action, but it also shapes our future actions by shaping the environment in which those future actions will be taken. Every time you carry out a particular behavior, it's not just a consequence for today, but it's also a consequence for tomorrow because you're reinforcing that neural pathway.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, self-discipline is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And by behaving the way that you want to behave and choosing people that are like you and sort of exhibiting those behaviors that are sort of desirable, you end up creating that environment as well.
So it is a kind of life itself is a kind of prompting mechanism, super complex. The friends you choose, the environments you choose, the way you modify the environment that you choose. Yes, but that seems like that process is much less efficient than a large language model. You can literally get a large language model through a couple of prompts to be a mix of Shakespeare and David Bowie, right? You can very aggressively change in a way that's stable and convincing. You really transform through a couple of prompts the behavior of the model into something very different from the original.
So well before ChatGPT,
Yeah.
I would tell my students, just ask, what would Manolis say right now? And you guys all have a pretty good emulator of me right now.
Yes.
And I don't know if you know the programming paradigm of the rubber duckling, where you basically explain to the rubber duckling that's just sitting there exactly what you did with your code and why you have a bug. And just by the act of explaining, you'll kind of figure it out.
Yes.
I woke up one morning from a dream where I was giving a lecture in this amphitheater, and one of my friends was basically giving me some deep evolutionary insight on how cancer genomes and cancer cells evolve. And I woke up with a very elaborate discussion that I was giving and a very elaborate set of insights that he had that I was projecting onto my friend in my sleep. And obviously, this was my dream. So my own neurons were capable of doing that, but they only did that under the prompt of, you are now Piyush Gupta. You are a professor in cancer genomics. You're an expert in that field. What do you say? So I feel that we all have that inside us, that we have that capability of basically saying, I don't know what the right thing is, but let me ask my virtual X, what would you do? And virtual X would say, be kind. I'm like, oh, yes. Or something like that. And even though I myself might not be able to do it unprompted, and my favorite prompt is think step by step. And I'm like, this also works on my 10-year-old. When he tries to solve a math equation all in one step, I know exactly what mistake he'll make. But if I prompt it with, oh, please think step by step, then it sort of gets you in a mindset. And I think it's also part of the way that ChatGPT was actually trained. This whole sort of human in the loop reinforcement learning has probably reinforced these types of behaviors, whereby having this feedback loop, you kind of aligned AI better to the prompting opportunities by humans.
Yeah, prompting human-like reasoning steps, the step-by-step kind of thinking. Yeah, but it does seem to be, I suppose it just puts a mirror to our own capabilities, and so we can be truly impressed by our own cognitive capabilities, because the variety of what you can try, because we don't usually have this kind of, we can't play with our own mind rigorously through Python code, right?
Yeah.
So this allows us to really play with all of human wisdom and knowledge, or at least knowledge, at our fingertips, and then mess with that little mind that can think and speak in all kinds of ways.
What's unique is that, as I mentioned earlier, every one of us was trained by a different subset of human culture. And ChatGPT was trained on all of it.
Yeah.
And the difference there is that it probably has the ability to emulate almost every one of us.
Yeah.
The fact that you can figure out where that is in cognitive behavioral space just by a few prompts is pretty impressive. But the fact that that exists somewhere is, absolutely beautiful. And the fact that it's encoded in an orthogonal way from the knowledge, I think, is also beautiful. The fact that somehow through this extreme overparameterization of AI models, it was able to somehow figure out that context, knowledge, and form are separable. And that you can sort of describe scientific knowledge in a haiku in the form of, Shakespeare or something. That tells you something about the decoupling and the decouplability of these types of aspects of human psyche.
And that's part of the science of this whole thing. So these large language models are, days old in terms of this kind of leap that they've taken. And it would be interesting to do this kind of analysis on them of context, of the separation of context, form, and knowledge. Where exactly does that happen?
Yeah.
There's already sort of initial investigations, but it's very hard to figure out where is there a particular parameter, set of parameters that are responsible for a particular piece of knowledge or a particular context or a particular style of speaking?
So with convolutional neural networks, interpretability had many good advances because we can kind of understand them. There's a structure to them. There's a locality to them. And we can kind of understand that different layers have different sort of ranges that they're looking at. So we can look at activation features and basically see where does that correspond to. With large language models, it's perhaps a little more complicated, but I think it's still achievable in the sense that we could kind of ask, well, what kind of prompts does this generate? If I sort of drop out this part of the network, then what happens? And sort of start getting at a language to even describe these types of aspects of human behavioral psychology, if you wish, from the spoken part in the language part. And the advantage of that is that it might actually teach us something about humans as well. Like we might not have words to describe these types of aspects right now, but when somebody speaks in a particular way, it might remind us of a friend that we know from here and there and there. And if we had better language for describing that, these concepts might become more apparent in our own human psyche. And then we might be able to encode them better in machines themselves.
I mean, both probably you and I would have certain interest with the base model, what OpenAI calls the base model, which is before the alignment of the reinforcement learning with human feedback and before the AI safety based kind of censorship of the model. It would be fascinating to explore, to investigate the ways that the model can generate hate speech, the kind of hate that humans are capable of. It would be fascinating, or the kind of course, like sexual language, or the kind of romantic language, or the all kinds of ideologies. Can I get it to be a communist? Can I get it to be a fascist? Can I get it to be a capitalist? Can I get it to be all these kinds of things, and see which parts get activated and not? Because it would be fascinating to sort of explore at the individual mind level and at a societal level, where do these ideas take hold? What is the fundamental core of those ideas? Maybe the communism, fascism, capitalism, democracy are all actually connected by the fact that the human heart, the human mind is drawn to ideology, to a centralizing idea. And maybe we need a neural network to remind us of that.
I like the concept that the human mind is somehow tied to ideology. And I think that goes back to the promptability of ChatGPT. The fact that you can kind of say, well, think in this particular way now. And the fact that humans have invented words for encapsulating these types of behaviors. And it's hard to know how much of that is innate and how much of that was like passed on from language to language. But basically, if you look at the evolution of language, you can kind of see how young are these words in the history of language evolution that describe these types of behaviors, like, kindness and anger and jealousy, etc. If these words are very similar from language to language, it might suggest that they're very ancient. If they're very different, it might suggest that this concept may have emerged independently in each different language, and so on and so forth. So looking at the phylogeny, the history, the evolutionary traces of language at the same time as people moving around that we can now trace thanks to genetics is a fascinating way of understanding the human psyche and also understanding sort of how these types of behaviors emerge. And to go back to your idea about sort of exploring the system unfiltered, I mean, in a way, the psychiatric hospitals are full of those people. So basically, people whose mind is uncontrollable,
Yes.
who have kind of gone adrift in specific locations of their psyche. And I do find this fascinating. Basically, watching movies that are trying to capture the essence of troubled minds, I think is teaching us so much about our everyday selves. Because many of us are able to sort of control our minds and are able to somehow hide these emotions. But every time I see somebody who's troubled, I see versions of myself, maybe not as extreme, but I can sort of empathize with these behaviors. And I see bipolar, I see schizophrenia, I see depression, I see autism, I see so many different aspects that we kind of have names for and crystallize in specific individuals. And I think all of us have that. All of us have sort of just this multidimensional brain and genetic variations that push us in these directions, environmental exposures and traumas that push us in these directions, environmental behaviors that are reinforced by the kind of friends that we chose or friends that we were stuck with because of the environments that we grew up in. So in a way, a lot of these types of behaviors are within the vector span of every human. It's just that the magnitude of those vectors is generally smaller for most people because they haven't inherited that particular set of genetic variants or because they haven't been exposed to those environments, basically.
Or something about the mechanism of reinforcement learning with human feedback didn't quite work for them. So it's fascinating to think about that's what we do. We have this capacity to have all these psychiatric or behaviors associated with psychiatric disorders. Yeah. But we, through the alignment process as we grow up with the parents, we kind of, we know to suppress them.
Yeah.
We know how to control them.
Every human that grows up in this world spends several decades being shaped into place.
Yeah.
And without that, maybe we would have the unfiltered ChatGPT 4.